Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the SmartList Trek episode for today. My name is Rod O'Connor, and I'll be leading the session today. Today, we're going to be talking about getting started with Popdock with focus on Dynamics GP. So that's all of you guys, all of the GP users. By way of housekeeping, if you do have questions or comments as we go through, please feel free to use the question or chat sections of the GoToWebinar app, and I will try to keep an eye on those sections and answer questions or reply to comments as we go through. So by way of agenda for what we're looking to cover today, we're going to talk about some of the initial setup that goes along with when you first buy Popdock and what it is you might want to do. We're then going to dive straight into navigating through Popdock. We're going to talk about customizing Popdock lists, getting in there, seeing what we can do. We're going to talk about adding a Popdock list, and as part of that, we're going to talk about existing SmartLists. So all of that investment that you've already made in your Dynamics GP environment, what do you got to do to take advantage of that in Popdock? So I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to assume that most of you have heard of Popdock. If not, hopefully you can pick it up along the way and just kind of what the goal of the product and all that is. But yeah, let's dive right in. All right, now when you're first setting up your GP environment for Popdock, one of the very first decisions you need to make, and although we pride ourselves on Popdock primarily being an end user product, this may be where you need to involve your IT department a little bit, and it's exposing your Dynamics GP environment to Popdock. So we have a couple different choices. This may sound technical for a couple minutes, and I'm going to throw these blog posts up into the chat so that you guys have quick access to these links as well. The first choice that you have for exposing your Dynamics GP or your whole SQL Server for that matter to Popdock is through a firewall access. So you can expose your SQL Server through your firewall. I'm not going to get into the whole technical how do we do that, but the part that your IT team will need to know is we can whitelist which IP addresses Popdock is going to be calling from. So what that means is when you've exposed that port through your firewall, you can restrict it to our IP so that you know that it's only Popdock knocking on the door. Okay. Your second choice, if you don't want to go the firewall route, is to use our gateways. Okay, and again, I'm going to give you a link. I'm going to give you this link in the chat, but we have two different flavors of gateway that apply to you as Dynamics GP users. The first is most obviously the Dynamics GP gateway. Now what we have here is a full set of instructions for you guys to follow, which will walk you through. You can see with total screenshots how to set this up. Again, I'm not going to dig into the details of this installation, but this installation happens once for every Dynamics GP server that you have. So each basically system database that you want to use within Popdock. So if you did have GP installed on two different servers, for example, or you wanted to have both your GP sandbox and your GP production available through Popdock, you could do that, but you would set up one gateway for each of those tenants. Okay, now, just so you guys know, or so everyone knows, it's really not uncommon for GP companies or GP customers to also have some custom SQL databases out there. We have an additional gateway for those databases so that you can expose those to the internet. Again, it has its own setup instructions. Now, the one key difference between the SQL Server gateway and the GP gateway is the GP gateway will cover all of the companies within your GP environment. So if you have 30 companies, they're already in and covered through that one gateway. For the SQL gateway, when you're doing it, you actually are choosing a SQL database as part of it. So when you actually go through this installation, you'll need to do it for each custom SQL Server database that you'd like to create within Popdock. Now I have a question in here. I'm going to admit, Mike, this is a little above my pay grade. Does it work with clustered high availability SQL environment? I'm going to short answer it yes, but I am going to follow up with you if my development team tells me anything differently. So I will take note of your email address, Mike, and I will follow up with you separately. Okay. Now, once we've gone through the process of setting up the gateway, we have to actually create the connection inside of our Popdock environment. So what we're going to do, we're going to click up here on the hamburger menu, and we are going to click on connectors. Okay, now your environment, when you come in, won't have 377 different connections already set up. So you'll see a much shorter list when you're in yours, probably only a sample connector when you first set it up. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Connector. And you can just search for GP here, or you can scroll through this environment. Now, here's one thing I want to point out to you guys, or to everyone on the call, because Julie, this will be available as a recording afterwards. I believe you'll all receive a link in the mail. So you can feverishly take notes if you prefer, but you can also feel free to just listen and know that your feverish note-taking can happen with the recording afterwards. While we're here, before I go into the GP connector, I do want to take a moment just to talk to everyone about some of these other connectors. Okay, so one of the great things about Popdock over and above Smart Connect, if we haven't, or Smart List, if we haven't already told you this, is we can pull our data from anywhere. So we've got about 60 connectors out of the box, and they include obviously GP, but they also include, well, all the other Microsoft ERPs. They include some other market ERPs. They include most of the major CRMs, so Microsoft CRM or Salesforce, but we also take it outside, so Cosmos DB or Bugsnag or GitHub. So you can actually take Popdock and all the cool stuff I'm going to be showing you today out to the rest of your business. So while we are focusing on GP, I want you to think about this for, the folks in marketing. Maybe they want to get some Bitly reporting going or something along those lines. Okay, now I am going to focus on GP here. So I'm going to select my GP connector. Now with every connector, you're just telling us, how do I log into your environment? And when I say I'm pretending like I'm Popdock. Okay, so in the case of GP, as I mentioned, we have a couple different choices. If I had chosen to expose my SQL Server through the firewall, or maybe my SQL Server is living out there on Azure, I can go ahead and use a SQL Server login where I'm going to put in the server address, what port is it living on, and then enter in my credentials. Okay. And if I have renamed my Dynamics database, I know lots of folks did once that became an option, you're just going to put in whatever you called your Dynamics database here. If you chose the gateway method, there were two different choices that you could have done when you set it up. There was basic authentication, which is going to be a user ID and password, or there's a token authentication, which is, you guessed it, using a token. Now, that's a choice that's discussed in that documentation that I showed you on the gateway installation. I have no strong opinion either way, whether you use basic or token. Lots of folks prefer token, so fill your boots. If you want to use a token, go for it. Just so everyone knows, if I wanted to set up a sample connector, okay, I would simply choose this. Now what this is going to be a copy of Fabricam, and we've got a couple other sample databases in there. And that's one where you maybe just want to muck about and learn about stuff. That's actually one that we use while we're doing the Popdock boot camp, which you may want to attend if you would like some deeper training than what we're covering off in this session, which is really meant to be a little bit higher level than the boot camp. But it's there for you as well. All right, so whichever option I choose, I'm going to fill in my login information. I'm going to click on validate. Popdock will test whatever credentials you've entered against the actual server. And if it's successful, the word validate will turn into the word connect, and you'll click on that. Okay. Now, what'll happen when you click on the connect is we're going to generate for you, in the case of the GP connector, 94 lists and several details that go along with those lists. And by details, I'll explain that a little in about 3.5 minutes when we start talking about navigation. Okay, but we're creating for you a default environment so that within, I'll say, half an hour of purchasing Popdock, you could be running Popdock lists with your users. It's really that simple to get started. Okay. Now, Popdock itself, when you first come in, you won't see any tabs across the top. It'll be a fairly empty environment. And when you first come in, you're going to want to add a list. You're going to want to work with this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Add New Tab. Now, for everyone on the call, your environments are going to look a little bit different because you may have set up only your one connector. You may have set up 37 connectors. It's really up to you how many connectors there are. But when I'm adding a list here, I personally am going to go find by connector right now because I have multiple GP connectors in my environment. So I want to choose the one that I set up specifically for this demo. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find my GP for SmartTrack. Okay. Then I'm going to choose which company I'm starting with, and starting with is the key phrase there. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. But which company am I starting my list based on? So I'll say Fabricam for now. Okay, I'm going to choose my sales group. And a group is really just, if you remember from SmartList, you had that list of folders over on the left-hand side. That's really what groups are. It's that list of folders. Okay, so I'm choosing my sales folder, and let's do sales line items. That's my favorite one. Now, you still have the ability to create favorites, and if I had had some favorites here, I would have been able to choose one from this dropdown. So I'm going to go ahead and say add. There you go. Now, whenever I see Skippy skipping like this, he is reaching directly in to my data source, whatever that data source is, and pulling data out. So in real time, I'm always getting this data, just like SmartList. Okay. Now, some of you may be thinking, but Rod, I have a data mart out there. I really want to pull data from it. I can still pull from the data mart. So if you happen to have one, we can pull from it. For us, it's just another data source. For us, we're pulling the data in real time in the sense that when we reach in, we're pulling out whatever's there right now. Okay, it doesn't matter how often you update that data mart, whether it's every 10 minutes, every hour, every day, that's up to you. Okay, so we can work with data marts, we just don't force you to. All right, now when we're in here, some of the similarities to what you guys are used to. Now some of this, just so you guys can understand the history of Popdock here, we took SmartList and eventually came out with SmartList Builder. So SmartList Builder gave you the ability to create new SmartLists. We then came out with a product called SmartView, which some of you may not be familiar with, but what SmartView was exactly what SmartList should have been originally. So we got rid of all those pain points that everybody just kind of got used to, or found very, very clever ways to work around. We actually got rid of those in a product and put that in Dynamics GP. So we took our lessons learned with SmartView, our lessons learned with SmartList Builder, and then took it to the next level and called it Popdock, which is what we're seeing today. Now with SmartView, we had a more intuitive way of adding columns. So over here on the right-hand side, I can go ahead and click Add Selected Columns, and you can see Skippy goes and skips, pulls back my data, and I have those new columns here. If they're out of order, I can move them around simply by dragging and dropping. Okay, or if they shouldn't have been there, if that was a terrible mistake, I can actually get rid of them here right on the screen. So everything is meant to be wicked easy and just easy to move things around. Now I can even not just move columns around in the order, I can actually group based on those columns. Whoops. Move my mouse a little too down. So you can see here now I'm grouped and I can see my green phone. I've got summarized data here. So what was the sum of the unit cost probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Sum of quantity and extended does though. So I've got some summary data here and I can expand that down and get the details under that green phone. Now, just like everyone is used to with SmartList, we did default that to 100. So I'm going to change that to 10,000 so that I can get back more lines of green phone sales so that it looks more fancy like that. Oops. All right. And now if I expand that down, you can see I've got grouped data that looks a whole lot better. Now, one thing, if you haven't seen Smart View before, whoops, I didn't want to click favorite. If you haven't seen Smart View before, one of the big things for me when Smart View first came out was it really got rid of, I've been calling it lately GPTSD. And that is when I have a filter, if you remember, GP would have stopped me, or SmartList would have stopped me right about here. So 4 filters and that was it. Smart View allowed me to add as many filters as I wanted, and I can start to mix my ands and ors. So if you remember from SmartList, I have a choice of all or. So all or any were my choices. So either everything was an or everything was an and. But here I can actually mix and match so that I can get really finite queries against my data. Okay, but we haven't lost anything. So let me hit date here, for example, actual ship date, just because it's at the top of the list. And while I can still use fixed dates, of course, we also have our compare dates, right? So I can compare to relative dates compared to today, you know, where I can say, show me everything where the actual ship date is this week. What have we shipped so far this week? Now, one quick shortcut that we did add that I really like, this is new to Popdock. I'm a big mouse click person. I don't know if many of you have seen me present before, but you know, mouse clicks add up over the course of a year. And here I can just say equals this week instead of saying between start of week and today. So a few less mouse clicks, you know, put those in your pocket. And at the end of the year, maybe you've got a walk to the coffee machine under your belt. One other thing we can do here is compare to other dates within the list. So when we talk about comparison fields, it's not just about relative dates, but we can actually be comparing to other fields within our list. Okay, so that's filtering. Now favorites, we still have our ability to have favorites within Popdock. So I can save this. I can tell you, just like SmartList, don't have your users name SmartList after themselves because you get a whole lot of extra favorites that nobody knows what they do. Name them appropriately, but I'm doing a demo right now and I'm going to click on this. Now you might notice tags. That's a way that we can use to group our list together. They're completely optional. You don't have to have them, but it's a quick way to look up. If you remember where I went to that add tab, I could have looked up based on tag if I needed to. Okay, now once I save that, if you notice my breadcrumbs up here change. I've got Rod's favorite is part of my path to where I am on this tab. And if I drop this down, I could very quickly switch back to my default view. Okay, so all of that should feel familiar. I've got my favorites that I can do. Now, just like GP, I can share my favorites with other users in my organization. So I can share it with specific users or with a group within my, we call them teams in Popdock. So I can share it with anyone in my team in Popdock or with other teams as well. All right, now one thing you can't do within SmartList that you can, or SmartView for that matter, that you can do here in Popdock is if you notice this word list, I can actually change any of my lists into a chart. Okay, now this isn't going to be replacing Popdock, or sorry, it is replacing Popdock because it is Popdock. It isn't going to be replacing Power BI or Tableau from a richness of the visuals, but you can do visualizations here. Think Excel in 1995. That's roughly where we are for our visualizations. And I can very quickly make a bunch of choices. Now, the reason I'm doing this, going through is to show you my category should be customer, for example. Okay, now what I'm showing you here is that I'm not doing any coding. I'm just making choices. It's not hard to learn what I'm doing. Okay, my value field here should really be extended price. Okay, and now I've got my top 5 customers or top 10 customers right here based on my extended price on all of my sales lines, and I could show what everyone else adds up to as well. So Plaza One, against all odds in our demo GP database, is a much better customer to us than some of the other ones I would have expected. Poor Aaron is not buying stuff anymore, apparently. Okay, so from a navigation standpoint, what you're seeing here is it's really easy to build this stuff and to ask questions of my data. I'm going to switch this back to a list while we're here. I'm going to get rid of this grouping real quick, because what the next thing I want to talk about is this drop down here. We haven't talked about that yet, and I kind of alluded to it earlier. Now, every list inside of Popdock is by default a multi-company list. So all I have to do is drop down this box and select which companies I want to be from. And if you notice here, I've got 963 instead of the 500 and some odd. Now, if I group by company, you can see I've got some coming from Fabricam. And I don't know where my paging went, but we do have some coming from 4 Iron Foundry in here as well. Okay, so basically, what we're saying here is without dropping out to SQL and building a union view, Popdock is going to give you multi-company lists just off the hop. Okay. Now, just so everyone knows, I'm inside the Popdock portal right now. I do want to show you, actually, before I do that, I want to flip to another list real quick so I can show you something called details. I touched on those earlier. Now, details are like go-tos, except we've taken go-tos and broken them out into 2 different categories. So one of the aspects of go-tos in GP, it allows you to drill through and get more data. Okay, so we're calling those details here in Popdock. Now, I'm on a list of GP customers. You should recognize a lot of these names. Now, details can provide me some of the stuff I would expect to be provided. So here's a list, for example, of receivable transactions for this customer. I can switch customers and get a different list of receivable transactions. Okay, so, and I can see their addresses and stuff. So all of this is coming from GP, and I would expect that. But one of the cool things about Popdock that we didn't have when it came to SmartList was the ability to get data from other solutions. I told you when we had connectors, we've got about 60 connectors. What I didn't tell you was 2 of those connectors, one is generic SQL Server, which means any custom databases you have can be a source. And one of them is a REST connection, which means any of those single purpose applications you guys are using online can also be a data source for Popdock. Okay, now one of the ways we can use those other connectors is, aside from having lists of their own, in details. So I can take a look, for example, I've got this customer selected at the open opportunities. In this case, I'm pulling these opportunities from Microsoft CRM. This could be Salesforce, this could be Sugar CRM or HubSpot or MailChimp, anything out there where I have customer related information on the internet, that could be this. Okay, I've also got one here where I'm showing tickets. Now, in this case, these tickets are coming from my online help desk solution. We're using one called Zendesk. We've got connectors for Freshdesk, for TeamDesk, I believe it is. There's a lot of help desk solutions out there. Most of them, if we don't have a standard connector, will have a REST API that you can talk to. But again, this doesn't have to be a help desk solution. This could be, maybe I've got a field service solution where I'm tracking their equipment records out there on the internet, or maybe I've got, insert solution here. We can have that data. Okay, I've even got a map here where I can take a look at where this customer is. So ever wanted to know where Alton Manufacturing lives? Here they are. Okay, so basically I can take data. If you count up what we just did, I've got a single list of GP data here. I've got details coming from GP, CRM, CRM, my help desk solution, and a Google map. And again, that could be any online service. Maybe you need a web weather service. Maybe you need, I think we had one that was doing air traffic tracking a while ago, which was kind of cool. So, any of those online APIs that you could work with. We just counted up 4 systems here in one list and nobody had to leave the screen, which is pretty cool. And I didn't have to phone anybody from any other department to get the access to whatever I need. Okay, so details are a really good way of expanding your user's knowledge. Now, I want to take this one step further. This isn't really a part of a getting started thing, but I do want to show you these lists that I'm showing you. I'm inside the Popdock portal. We can take these lists out to the other places where your users are working. It goes a little bit beyond what we're covering today, but I just wanted to show you this one example where I've got that same list of customers. I'm in SharePoint right now. So if you're running Office 365 at all, you own SharePoint, which means you can do this in about 5 minutes. It took me to set this up. Okay, and I've got all the same SmartList type functionality that we talked about earlier. I've got all the filtering that I could want. I can refresh anytime. I've got a multi-company list that's pulling data. I can add and remove columns, sort columns, group by columns, and even take a look at all of those other applications that we talked about. Okay, so here we've got our opportunities. I could show you tickets if I really wanted to beat this to death. I've even got this little graph out here, very similar to the visualization I was showing you earlier, where I can see what are the top 5 things that this customer purchases so that while I'm talking to them, I have all the information about them that I need. And I never had to leave, in this case, SharePoint. I can show you that in Teams. I can show you that in CRM, in Salesforce. Yes, it can run in Microsoft Teams. We just had that come in as a question. So just so that I can show you, I'm not making it up. Here we've got Microsoft Teams, and I've got a couple of different lists in here, and I'm going to actually use one of these lists to show you another feature. But here I've got that collections list, same customers, same types of details, same ability to add columns, and to embed a widget in Teams actually takes about 1.5 minutes. There's a couple of mouse clicks there. I'll show you that when we talk about actually creating widgets, but there's no amount of time that it takes. Okay, now while we're here, I want to click on this Zendesk tickets one here while we're in Teams. I told you that we broke up our concept of go-tos into 2 different things. One was called details, which I showed you, and one was called actions, which I haven't shown you yet. Now, what actions allow you to do is make your data much more interactive. So you can see here, I've got a number of different options here, like add a ticket comment, where I could click in this and add an actual comment to this, right? Now, this is because I'm taking advantage of the REST API associated with this. If you remember, I said Zendesk was an online application, but I could do things from here like open an online application. So I could go and look at that ticket in Zendesk. I could kick off a Smart Connect process. So those of you on the call who are also Smart Connect users, you could kick off a Smart Connect map to maybe create an invoice against this ticket. You could also kick off a Power Automate process if you guys have gotten into Power Automate processing, which could send a text message or create SharePoint folders or do, kick off some type of authorization process or approval process. So you have lots of choices when we're looking at actions to make your data really interactive. Okay, so from an end user standpoint, when we talk about navigating Popdock, that's really the lion's share of what they really need to know. There's going to be, one thing that you might want to talk to your users about, or if you are the user, talk to yourself about, is editing the profile. Okay, especially when we look at this options tab here. Now, two things I like to make sure people set when they're coming in and looking at their profile is their time zone, which affects any UTC date fields within Popdock. So they'll always set the date and time to be relative to where you are. As well as the locale. Now, if you're in an environment like myself, where your company you work for happens to have a different locale. In my case, I work for an American company, but I happen to live in Canada. So while they have a locale set up of USA in our account, I'd like to see the dates and numbers look a little bit differently. I won't say correctly. People have called me on that in the past. I'll say correctly for where I live. Okay, so I'm going to choose Canada from the list. And now when I look at dates and numbers within Popdock, they're going to be in the format I anticipate them. And you can see here we have locales all over the place. So this is the kind of the two big settings that as a new user of Popdock, I think everybody should come in and make sure they take a look at. Okay. Now let's talk about connectors. We already talked about adding the connector. So you guys watched me add the GP. Well, you watched me do about 70% of adding the GP connector. Now let's talk about what we can do with that connector. So what we're transitioning from now is the SmartList or Smart View portion of Popdock, and we're transitioning into the SmartList Builder portion of Popdock. All right. Now, I'm going to be showing you on my GP connector all of these features, but just know that everything I'm showing you, with the exception of one thing, which I'll explain which one, you'll probably know it when you see it, but except for one thing, all of this is true for all of our connectors. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and just show you that everything about this connector is customizable. So you can see I even renamed my connector to Smart Trek. If I don't call companies companies, I can call them divisions. Anytime I see a flashing cursor or a drop down, I can change the value in that field. So everything about these connectors is customizable to you and your environment. I mentioned earlier, if I had multiple GPs, I can rename them to be whatever I need them to be, maybe of QA production. I've worked with a few customers lately who have multiple GP tenants just because of various acquisitions and different upgrade paths over the years. You can have all of that. We can do it all. Now, within the list, a couple of things to show you. So I'm going to choose my customers list here. Again, everything about this, even the group that it's in, is configurable by you. So no two Popdocks have to be exactly alike. You can make it look like whatever suits your fancy. Now with the available fields, again, we're not going through any type of code thing. Very much like SmartList Builder, we've tried to make it as intuitive as possible for the average Joe to come in here and build their own Popdock list. So I can, if I know we're never going to have an address 3, I can just remove it directly from my connector. So why burden users with having to sort past address 3 if it's never going to be a concern for them? Or again, if that was a terrible mistake, I can click here and add address 3 back to my list, and it's going to be part of my Popdock list again. Okay, I can also go through and change. So if it's not customer ID for me, it's customer number. I can just change that as well. Everything about this customizable. We also have calculated fields, as you would expect. Now, when it comes to our GP connector or our SQL connector, you've actually got a couple choices for how you set up a calculated field. So let me look at customer discount here, for example. Okay, now If you notice, it's set by default to SQL for a GP connector. That's because that's what everybody has been using in Popdock, or not in Popdock, in SmartList Builder up until now. So in SmartList Builder, you're using SQL syntax. So you can still continue to use that, or you could use Popdock script. Now, Popdock script is very similar to Excel. So for those folks in the room who don't know anything about Excel, you most likely have used, sorry, for those on the call who don't know anything about SQL, you definitely have used Excel, and you can use Popdock script, which is pretty much the same thing. Okay, within our fields as well, we can come in and identify what is our default field list, if I want balance type to be on the list, and where does it appear in that default list. So again, very, very similar to SmartList Builder. We do have the ability to come in and add restrictions to our lists. So as if I wanted to create a list that was restricted by warehouse, for example, or I wanted a list of GL accounts, but I don't want to include my payroll accounts, this is where I would do that. So I could just choose my field, set my criteria, okay, and apply it to specific people if I wanted to. Okay. Now the details, I wanted to show you how details get added because they look wicked cool, right? When you go into the detail, it gives you lots of great information. It looks like it should be tough to do, but it's really not. It's just a whack of drop downs and custom field and fields, right? So I'm just typing in, what do I want to call it? I'm choosing whether it's a list or an image or a summary. If it's a list, do I want it to be a chart or an actual list? How do I want to actually see this? I'm choosing which particular data I'm showing in this detail. Okay, so in this case, you can see I'm exposing my customer addresses. As you already know, it doesn't have to come from the same connector. There just has to be a relationship. I want to be able to filter the data based on something about my parent list. Okay. And then I choose where's it going to be, below the record, beside the record, or I could have right-clicked and drilled through to a new list if it was something I thought I might want to filter on or get more data on. Okay, here's where I'm adding that filter I talked about. So this is how I'm making my detail context sensitive based on my parent list. And you can see there that I'm mapping my customer ID to my customer number field. Okay, and here's where I'm choosing which fields will appear. Again, there's no code here. I'm not writing anything. I'm just ticking boxes, right? And everything just works. Okay, and I can even get down into my favorites. So as people are adding favorites, if I'm adding a favorite that I don't think anybody should process or should change on me. So for example, I'm using it for some process that's feeding into something else, or I just want to make sure that every time Jim looks at this list, it looks the exact same. I can lock that so nobody can change this favorite on accident. Okay, and as I mentioned, I can assign this list to different users or different teams within my business. Okay, now, one quick note, if you notice this add list, and if you remember, I told you we create for you 94 lists out of the box. Okay, you actually have the ability to click on add lists here, and you can pull in lists from, in this case, Dynamics GP based on two different things. We can pull in specific lists that you have built using SmartList Builder, or you can see we've got SmartList Designer down below. So any of those custom smart lists that you guys have inside of your Dynamics GP, we can pull those in to Popdock. Now, once you pull them into Popdock, they're automatically multi-company lists, which is really cool. Okay, we can also get access here to your Dynamics, to any tables within your SQL Server database of your GP environment, either at the Dynamics database level or at the company database level. And again, to make this a multi-company list, all I have to do is check this box to say display for all companies. Okay, so once I'm ready to do that, Elaine, I'm going to answer your question in 2 seconds. Once I do this, I just click on add and it's going to become part of my Popdock environment. It's going to go through the process. You'll see here I've got a pending list section of actually adding those lists to my Popdock environment, and then I can use those through Popdock with all of the features. Okay. Now, I've got a couple questions regarding security and some of the stuff I've just shown you. So the first one is, can you assign a list to a user who would not have access to the information inside of GP? And the answer is absolutely. So you can, the users of Popdock do not have to be users of Dynamics GP. So now you can take that data out to the rest of your business. Okay, so we're not tied to GP security, we're not tied to CRM security, we're not tied to whatever security. That doesn't mean we have no security. That means we're not tied to those different security elements. So you would control who within Popdock should have access to the data that's being pulled, basically based on the list. And as you saw, I can actually apply restrictions based on individual users, which means, you know, Jim might have access to the sales report, but only where the territory is equal to Jim. Okay. Is only the admin allowed to assign lists to people? Not exactly. So within Popdock, we've got this concept of roles. Roles allow you to define who can do what. So there is within roles the option to set up a role to have access to security. So you can assign non-admins the ability to control security, but not just anybody logging into Popdock gets to control security. You're choosing who does that. There are 2 admins that you'll set up within Popdock. Each of those admins basically have total access to the system, and that's so that they can make sure that they can you can make sure you have at least 2 people who can administer all of that level of security and stuff. Okay, now the last thing I want to talk about while we're in here is these custom lists. Now, what custom lists allow you to do is start mixing and matching your data in really cool ways. So I'm going to take a look at joins multiple lists here. Okay. I'll also mention when you're out in the wild, you're not going to want to name lists after yourself, but you can. Now, just because this isn't always clear what it is, if you remember when I was looking at my invoice or my sales line items list, it said I had 100 lines or 500 lines or what have you. That's what this is doing. So if this list, this join list I'm looking at is opportunities, I can go ahead and call it opportunities and a singular of opportunities. There's an opportunity. Okay, and I have to assign it to a group. So I'll just put it in sales. Now, what I have to do next is choose which lists I'm joining. And I'm not going to go through all the different list types here. What I'm hoping to convey to you within the next few minutes that we're talking about this is how easy it is to do this. Okay, so I'm going to choose my customers list here. Now I'm going to join it to a different connector. Okay, so now I can join it and let's connect it to my opportunities list. Okay, and the field I'm going to do it on is account ID is equal to customer ID. Okay, so I've built a relationship between those 2 lists. Now, the really important part of that is this is 2 lists that are from different connectors. So while I could join GP lists together, that makes total sense, I can also join the list to other connectors. Okay, and now I can start getting into choosing which fields I want to have within my list. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through and doing it in detail, but hopefully you get a sense of just how easy this is. And now what I've got, in case you're not sure what a join list is, I have a single list where I have columns that are available from both my ERP and my CRM. So now I can see, what is their past due balance in my ERP? What is their credit terms? What is their customer class? But I can combine that with things like their phone, their fax, and their email preferences coming from my CRM. Okay, so I can really start to get clever with this and think about these joins. They don't have to be ERP to CRM. I could be joining my HR solution from GP out to my payroll solution from the internet, or insert different lists that could be combined in this way here. So think about your whole business, not just your finance teams. And again, all these different things I showed you earlier, the calculated fields, the defaults, the restrictions, all of that applies to this custom list. Okay, now a join is just one way that we can create a custom list. We do have other types here. Restrictions and summaries, hopefully those make sense just based on their names. A merge list is another pretty important one. And what that does is it takes two or more lists and combines them into a single list. Okay. Now, where a join takes two lists side by each and connects them based on a relationship, a merge really stacks them on top of each other and turns them into a single list. So think about a company that has 5 online stores. Okay. They want to get one report that is all of my online sales for this week. I can take a merge list and merge all 5 sales reports from all 5 different online stores into a single list. And now I can query that in real time. It's pretty cool. You guys will learn in some of the other sessions some other uses for merge lists, especially next week when we talk about beyond GP, where a lot of folks are using merge lists for in cases where we're merging historical data with ongoing data. So there's a ton of chance for you to use those. And a compare list, my favorite example is I did have a partner who built a customization, and it was in the project module. And what was happening was when project transactions would post, they wouldn't always hit the GL. So we used a compare list to compare posted project transactions to posted GL, and we were able to narrow down which ones were missing. So compare lists can be really, really powerful as well. Okay. I do have one last thing I want to show everybody. I talked about widgets. I showed you a widget inside SharePoint. I showed you a widget inside Teams. I want to talk about how simple it can be to use those widgets. So I'm going to click on the hamburger up here. I'm going to click on Developer, and I'm going to click on Add a Widget. Now, a widget, just like everything else, okay, is a bunch of drop downs. So I can choose what type of widget I want. And again, we do have full training available to every single one of you that we can deep dive into each of these different widget types for you. But let's just take my GP for Smart Track data. I'm going to choose my Fabricam. Let's go to my sales. Use my famous sales line items list here. I can even choose my particular favorite. So that favorite where I set the grouping, I set my columns the way I wanted them to be, I put my filters in place. It's good for my week-to-date sales report. I can choose that now, and I'm giving my user, my widget user, access to that. Okay, so next I just choose my parameters here, which is how I'm going to pass in. Now, I didn't use any parameters for the widgets I showed you, but if I was embedding this in CRM, for example, I probably want a widget for customer number so that the account that I was on in CRM, I would only be seeing invoices for that particular account. Okay, so that's where the parameters come in. And this is the really important part here of this. Once I've created the widget, so if you remember, this is all I did here was I chose a list and I let it use the default fields because I had a favorite which had all the fields I wanted it to be. Really all I need is the embed codes. So Took me, what, 3 minutes to explain it to you? And I was talking the whole time and clicking buttons. But at this point, I could take this code right here and I could go to Teams. I could click on this plus up here, and you can see I do this from time to time. I'm going to choose Popdock. Now, if you guys don't see Popdock on the list, you're going to click on Manage Apps. You're going to search for Popdock. You're going to find it. You're going to use it. Okay. Now, once I choose it, all I have to do is put in that widget ID. Okay. Now, I can, if I had parameters, I could put parameters here. For example, if this was my marketing team and they only needed to see my marketing expenses from my GL account transactions, I could put those restrictions in here. Okay, I go ahead and save that. And now you can see I've got a new list that is going to pull in that particular favorite of mine. Okay, complete with any details that that list may have, which I can now rename if I wanted to. And Bob's your uncle. We have a list. Okay, now this, we can take this link to anywhere that accepts. So in the case of my SharePoint here, all I needed to do was create a web part and give this as the iframe address. That's all it took. Okay, and then we can also get more complex. If you are a Salesforce user, for example, we can give you your Apex code, and we do have full blog posts on our website of what to do with that Apex code, how to embed a widget in CRM. All of that is available to you at any point. Just go to our website and hit the knowledge base. Now, you guys have been doing pretty good about asking questions so far. This really gets me through to what I needed to show you today as far as an introduction to Popdock goes. There's a lot more available to it. This was really meant to really get you started, get you rolling with Popdock. Are there any other, if there are any other questions that you want me to answer, please feel free to throw them in the chat now. And in the meantime, just know that I'm going to go back to my start screen here. Just know that we do have more webinars within this series. If you go back to the section where you registered for this one, you'll see that we've got several coming up. Let me just pull up the full list here. Over the next couple days. So we do have tomorrow coming up, planning for life after Dynamics GP. Oh, is that tomorrow? Nope. Tomorrow is accessing Dynamics GP data securely in the cloud, presented by our product manager, Chris Du. There's a great question from, I'm going to pronounce it George. I apologize if I say that wrong. Will SmartView go away in GP, or is this on top of? This is absolutely on top of SmartView. SmartView has its place inside Dynamics GP. It has its place inside your VPN outside of Dynamics GP. Neither SmartView nor SmartList Builder will be going away at all. Popdock is absolutely on top of those two products. In fact, we have bundled them together from a licensing standpoint. So when you purchase your Popdock subscription, you also own SmartView and SmartList Builder. We have a regular demo on Fridays, everyone, that it actually explains that whole concept. We do walk through SmartView if you haven't seen it before. We walk through SmartList Builder just in case, and then we do walk through Popdock as well and talk about those licensing things. But absolutely, all three products are still solid. Okay. Well, I don't see anything else in the queue. I hope to see you at the remaining sessions throughout this entire series. I thank you all for attending this one and spending the entire time here. If you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to either your partner, to your account manager here at E1 Solutions, or just fire off a note to sales@e1solutions.com. Thanks, everyone.